Be sure to check out my second channel called Rob Explains. There you can check out videos where I explain things outside of comic books. So with Ant-Man having just been released, I thought I might do a review for this film. But rather than running things off the top of my head, I figured I'd use my recent method of creating videos as a way to give you all my opinion on the film and where it stands in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So as a relatively unknown person to non-comic readers, Ant-Man was actually a bit of a gamble for Marvel. With Edgar Wright's repertoire of films including Hot Fuzz, Shaun of the Dead, and Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, his departure as director early into Ant-Man's production left a lot of people concerned as to whether or not the film would fall in line with the high quality of films that we've come to expect in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Having said that, if Edgar Wright's departure as director resulted in the film as it was presented to us, then I can't say I'm sad to have seen him go. Combining a bit of action and character development alongside a whole lot of comedy, Ant-Man shows that even the smallest characters, both metaphorically and physically, can stand on their own 2 feet. While Paul Rudd seems to maintain the same kind of character throughout the film in that he's introduced to us as a thief, he operates as a thief, and concludes the film as a thief, aside from this desire to prove himself as a hero in the eyes of his daughter Cassie, there really isn't a whole lot of character development here. Having said that, Paul Rudd undertakes the role of Scott Lang in spectacular fashion. If I can be a little melodramatic here, the role of Scott Lang feels like it was made for Paul Rudd. While this is true from the perspective of how the film was written, even the source material in terms of Scott Lang's involvement with the Avengers in the comics as well as this current solo series absolutely screams Paul Rudd. The way that Paul Rudd portrays Scott Lang seems so natural here. Part of this is most likely due to his talent as an actor, and part of it's probably due to the fact that I can only assume that there were some improvised sessions in this film. But from the unease at the responsibility that comes with being Ant-Man to his rise as a superhero, Paul Rudd does an incredible job holding up the film as its main star. As one of the more controversial characters in Marvel Comics due to the act of striking his wife, Marvel had stated early on that the character Hank Pym would in no way delve into this iconic story and instead would strictly focus on his relationship with Scott Lang as well as his daughter. To this end, Marvel makes up for this by providing some very deep insight into the character of Hank Pym himself. Without spoiling anything, Hank Pym as he's portrayed by Michael Douglas is a man haunted by his actions. Where Hank Pym is best known for creating Ultron in the comic books, the regret he demonstrates in the comics is transferred to the film. But rather than the source of his regret being Ultron, the source of his regret is his discovery of the Pym particle and the inevitable consequences that followed regarding his wife Janet Van Dyne and their daughter Hope Van Dyne. Furthermore, his relationship with Scott Lang undertakes more of a teacher-student role than anything else, but this is done in a way that fits the characters together nicely as opposed to leaving us feeling as though they were simply smashed together. Teaching Scott Lang the ropes in terms of how to use his newfound gifts in a manner that will help him achieve their combined goals, Michael Douglas does a fantastic job of leading Scott Lang without actually becoming overbearing. As a character that does exist in Marvel Comics, her publication history is only about 14 issues, so I think it's safe to say that Marvel was basically starting from scratch here, especially when you consider that Hope Van Dyne in the comics was actually a villain. That being said, if Hank Pym was Scott Lang's instructor, and if Scott Lang's daughter was his reason for becoming Ant-Man, Hope Van Dyne is the person that helps Scott Lang overcome his confidence issues. While Hank Pym is more of the broad brush, I guess, painting the canvas of Scott Lang as Ant-Man, Hope Van Dyne fills in the small areas. While the estrangement between herself and Hank Pym is only explored on the surface, the fact that Evangeline Lilly signed a multi-film contract becomes apparent as her character left me wanting to see what kind of development we would actually see as the character progressed, especially with the events as they unfolded towards the end of the film. So while the rest of the main cast was pretty solid, I walked away from the film feeling like Darren Cross was the weak link in the chain. Now while this is not meant to be a shot against Corey Stoll, who has proven himself to be a formidable actor in his own right, The lack of interest regarding Darren Cross seemed to be more a writing issue than anything else. While Darren Cross is the first villain that Scott Lang faced after undertaking the mantle of Ant-Man, the character in the comics was not the slightest bit interesting. Case in point, Darren Cross as a villain that only appears in 7 issues of Marvel Comics, dying almost immediately after his introduction due to a heart condition. And so with Marvel plagued by their inability to create compelling villains in solo films, it stands to reason that Darren Cross would come up short in terms of relatability, but even more so than that, even a general sense of interest. Now, the final topic I'd like to address here before we get into closing statements is Ant-Man's placement in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Again, while I was initially concerned that the film would fall short and that Marvel would attempt to compensate by constantly throwing the Avengers in our faces, the film's ability to stand on its own 2 feet mitigates this concern. Indeed, while it's made clear to us where this film stands in relation to the timeline of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, as well as the other films, and even the Avengers themselves, this is done both tastefully and conservatively. Again, without providing too many spoilers in this segment, what we're told is that this film basically takes place after Avengers 2 Age of Ultron, but directly before the events of Civil War. So here's a $1 million question. Is the film good? Absolutely. If what you're looking for is a throwback to how the Marvel Cinematic Universe got started with the comedy-action combination that led to the success of Iron Man 1, this film is absolutely for you. Because most of the fight scenes take place with Scott Lang in his Ant-Man form, the movie has a totally different feel from any of the Marvel Cinematic Universe films so far. Furthermore, I feel like this takes a great break away from the darker tone of some of the more recent films as well as upcoming films like Captain America 3, and if I can be a little bold here, I'd say this movie ranks a close second behind Guardians of the Galaxy in terms of uniqueness and contribution to the list of Marvel films so far. With that being said, I will catch you guys later. Peace.